Thanks for being here. All right, John. So next up, we're going to consider the agenda, and I believe there's an amendment to the agenda we're going to make.
That's right. We are going to amend this evening's agenda to add a report from the meeting with the SROs. Can I get a motion to approve that addition to the agenda? I have one from Martin. Can I get a second, please? And one from Mike. Thank you. Seconded.
And you just say all in favor?
All in favor. Jeez Louise.
That's okay. You got it.
Okay. Lots of thumbs up. Thank you.
Okay.
That amendment is approved.
And John, I'm just going to suggest that we place that item after the presentation by the subgroup. So probably, nothing's super time certain, but around 6 o'clock, we'll hear that piece of it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay. And next we need to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Is that correct? Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting? I have one from Kathy. Thank you. Can I get a second? And from Mike. All in favor of approving last meeting's minutes? Those minutes are approved. Thank you.
Okay, John, I'm going to jump in and just give a couple of quick updates before you move us to public comment, if that's okay. You're doing a great job.
All right,
so a couple of just updates for folks, largely who are joining us, our guests, as well as folks watching at home. So the first is that there's been a few pieces of information updates, sort of just to close the loop from our last meeting that I want to bring people's attention to. So we've had one additional personal statement that's been posted to the website. This was actually a statement that the committee received before we had a website earlier in our process, but it hadn't been on the website. So it's up. I just want folks to know that. The second piece, I have 4 items here. The second piece is we did do a demographic analysis of the community survey. So by that, I mean breaking down by folks who've self-identified as current parents and guardians, then separately alumni, and then separately former parents and guardians. That analysis is also up on the website, and you can find that in the current group folder. I know we have a lot of information up there, but believe me, all this information is posted there for you to read. And you'll see the breakdown of the questions based on those demographic breakdowns, which for some folks were interested in that from the committee last time. The third piece is that we had some open-ended questions from last time. And I was just going to read the answers really quick because we didn't have one of our committee members who had the answers at the time. And these were 3 questions around the community study itself, or a community survey study itself, and who was interviewed. So just quickly on those. So where was the community survey posted? The committee did make the request to the school district to push the survey out to the full community through the district's website, social media channels, and Front Porch Forum. And the district did post the link under its whatever the news function is on the websites for each of the schools, which auto-populates social media. And that means their Facebook and Twitter pages. However, the district told me after the fact they do not have a Front Porch Forum account and therefore did not post there. So I just wanted to close that loop. And then the second question we didn't have an answer for at the time was wanted clarification, I should say, is why did the subgroup decide to do the survey to the wider community beyond current parents and guardians? And the survey was open to the wider community beyond students and staff and current parents because the SRO program began several years ago. And so it seemed pertinent to allow alumni and others to participate. And that was the decision of the subgroup for the community survey. The final piece was just on who was interviewed to inform last meeting's presentation, because that piece wasn't in there. And did any SROs get interviewed for that piece of it? There were no SROs formally interviewed, but you'll see tonight that from John and Shannon, our co-chairs, they did since have conversation with them, and they'll report that out tonight. And the other folks who were contacted last time included staff at SACS. It was actually staff at several different campuses. I'm not going to go through every single name, but you'll see the names of all the staff. They range from school counselors to social workers and home school coordinators and whatnot. So you can see the list of folks consulted on that website. And then the last piece I just want to say, because the committee did receive this information and from a couple different sources, the article is also posted, articles and information is also posted under the additional resources folder, which is where we post all information we've received from the community and from committee members, is the recent information regarding the ACLU of Vermont and Vermont Legal Aid's press release and information regarding Medicaid funding concerning Maple Run Union School District as well as North Country School District and its use for the SRO program. So there is more information there posted. I just wanted to flag that since obviously it's relevant to this particular school district and this particular conversation to make sure people know that information's there. And just again, clarify the committee received that directly and it is also posted for the community. It's a lot of updates, but there's a lot of good stuff on the website and we try to keep that updated as in real time as possible. Thank you, John, for that airtime, and I will pass it back to you.
Thank you, Emma. So now we will begin our public comment portion of the meeting. Members of the community who wish to engage in the public comment, please direct chat me, John Nichols, with just your name, and you'll be called on. We are going to try to keep public comment to about 2 minutes, allowing for adjustments if there aren't lots of commenters or things like that. As you engage in the public comment, we ask that community members acknowledge the following guidelines. Speak from your personal experience and understanding. Listen to understand someone's lived experience. Question and disagree with ideas, not people. Honor people's identity by believing their lived experience. No personal attacks. Acknowledge the difference between intent and impact. Take responsibility for the negative impact of your action and words, and honor the work and people engaged in this complex topic. So with that, we will begin the public comment, and I will check my chat and begin calling on people.
And as you check your chat, I'll just remind folks, we have about 2 minutes, but as John said, we're going to try to give a little flexibility to make sure we aren't, harshly cutting folks off, but I will try to friendly wave. And then if I have to come on, I would just ask you wrap up that thought.
Okay. And our first public comment comes from Dr. Jen Williamson. Dr. Williamson, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I was having computer problems earlier, so I just wanted to make sure. I just want to keep this really brief. I just want to say, a Vermont police officer has 16 weeks of training, which is 4 months or the equivalent of a single semester of college. And to become an SRO, they require a 40-hour seminar. So in other words, an additional week. In addition to all that you've learned about the lack of benefits from hiring SROs and the trauma our children must suffer through going forward, do we want our school funds to pay for our children to have counselors or cops? I would much rather have counselors who are trained in developmental childhood development, and they're supervised in learning how to deal with children who may have emotional or social issues. They will be able to counsel them if they have problems at home, if they're being bullied in school, all of those things. I think our money would be much better spent going forward after this pandemic, year that we have never experienced before in any of our lives. That's just absolutely different from everything we've ever experienced. Do we want our money going to the SRO program, or do we want our money going towards psychological benefiting, social benefiting people, employees of the school? And in my opinion, our children deserve a lot better, and I really would rather our money be spent differently, and obviously, especially taking away that money that should be spent for wellness, which is Medicaid money, should be spent for wellness of all children, and not to subsidize the police department.
Thank you, Jen. Next public comment will be from Nancy Keller. Nancy, feel free to come off mute.
Hello, And I first want to thank everybody for all their service to this really important community committee. I also just want to introduce myself a little bit and give you some background. I have been an educator in Winooski School District for over 30 years. I also have been the founding members of a nonprofit called the Safety Team, in that I am a women's self-defense instructor as well. So have a background in keeping people safe or helping keep people safe. I also want to mention that I have a 4th degree black belt, and my primary teacher for the last 10 to 15 years was also the recently retired director of the Police Academy in Vermont, Captain Drew Bloom. I feel that I am in a unique position to give some insight into whether or not school districts should have an SRO. I've had wonderful relationships with all the SROs who's worked in Winooski. I was a teacher in Winooski prior to the SROs being introduced into our school system in the mid-90s. But I have to say, what really brought this home to me as an educator is last summer, I had students of color publicly come forward and finally admit to the trauma as well as the unsafe feelings they had by having an SRO in our school district. And I was surprised. I wasn't expecting that. The SROs were fabulous people. But as an educator, if there are 10% or even 2% of the students in my classroom who feel unsafe, it's my job as an educator to make sure that they feel safe. And if that means that Winooski School District needs to evolve, for example, the SRO position, it does. And so I'm hoping that the school district in which my children are graduates of would also embrace the opportunity to evolve the SRO program. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Our next public comment will be from Jamila Vogel. Jamila, please come off mute.
Thank you. I will try to keep this succinct. I have a lot of thoughts. I'm a school counselor at St. Albans City School, so I want to echo a lot of what was said previously in the previous 2 public comments, and just sort of lend my agreement with those comments, and also reiterate a few points. And I'll start with the kind of logistical point, which is that we have a desperate need for mental health services. We do not have a desperate need for police services. This is a really a lot of community resources being put into a program, and several full-time folks positions being funded. And it's not the cost does not justify the benefit of the program. That's extremely clear to me. There simply just isn't enough of a need. And I will say that having had the opportunity and the need to collaborate with both Paul Talley and Kaylee Catterat at St. Albans City School at times when we did need to have a relationship between the school and the police department, at times when that was really vital, but those did not require a full-time uniformed armed police officer in the building. I also will say that I would support something similar to what the Burlington school system is talking about, with having some kind of having a relationship between the school district and the police department through something like a liaison of someone who's stationed at the police department but has a relationship to the school. And I would especially support that if I knew that that person had specific training in anti-bias and anti-racism and trauma, mental health, as well as in de-escalation, restorative practices, and child development. It would be really beneficial to have someone who had that specific and robust training in those areas that was also connected to the police department and also had a relationship to the school. But I wanted all of those logistical pieces I think are important, but I want to highlight what to me is most important. I am not in support of the SRO program in our schools, and not because of the individual quality of any of the officers. It has, for me, that is important but secondary. I am not in support of the SRO program in our schools because we're in the midst of a national conversation about police reform that is responsive to the historic and present day disproportionate impact of the criminal justice system and policing, specifically on BIPOC folks, Black and Brown folks, as well as folks who are neurodivergent, gender nonconforming, and people with mental health challenges. All of these communities of people have had historically negative interactions with our criminal justice system. And I want to specifically highlight.
You just had 2 minutes. If you could just wrap
up.
Oh
man, I have so much.
I know. Thank you.
So short.
I know.
So really, what I'm going to wrap up by saying that there's a lot of repair of harm that needs to be done, and a reckoning and reform that needs to happen. And it is not time to involve minor children in that repair. We are putting the cart before the horse, and there's work that needs to be done before we involve our children.
Thank you, Jamila. One quick note, I apologize. I was supposed to ask each public commenter to acknowledge that they heard and agreed to the guidelines I set forth, and I did not do that for our previous commenters. I apologize for that. I will begin to do so now. Our next public comment is to come from Ryer Erickson. Ryer, did you hear and agree to the guidelines I spoke before?
Yes.
Thank you, Ryer.
So I think one thing I just want to highlight regarding the Medicaid funding is what City School has done essentially is use money that's meant to benefit children with disabilities into a program that by about 5 times harms students with disabilities. That's statistically, that's in Vermont. There's no way we can refute that we are using Medicaid funding meant to help children with disabilities to harm children with disabilities. That is shameful. That is beyond shameful, and that's something that should never have happened. And it's a blight on this school district. What I want to say and what I want to ask each one of the committee members, and this comes from the last meeting, where there was a lot of talk of what's most beneficial for the most amount of students. Forget that question. Ask yourself what's least harmful for all students. How many students are you okay with as committee members being shoved to the ground, having a slur, the R word, screamed at you as you're being beat up by an adult? How many children is that? Are you okay with that? That's a simple question, and one that each one of you should ask yourselves. And further than that, ask yourself what happens the next time if it's a Black child and the N word is used. Ask yourself what happens if it's the next time and it's a transgender child and something is done horribly to that person. How many children is each one of you okay with being hurt by adults in the school because these adults don't have the training to deal with children? My daughter's teacher has a master's degree, and she is being paid less than we are paying each one of these SROs, or the money that we're using for each one of these SROs. We're talking about education funding in this state and how we're at a deficit with education funding. And meanwhile, we'll now, after the Medicaid goes away, we'll be spending $250,000 on this program that has absolutely no beneficial product for any child. There's no proof that it does any good and only proof that it does harm. So please ask yourself that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryer. Next public comment comes from Zach Scheffler. Zach, did you hear, do you acknowledge and agree to the guidelines for public comment?
I do.
Thank you, Zach.
Hi all, I'm Zach. I live in St. Albans City, and I just want to share just something personal and then some thoughts on what I read the other day. As a young person, I'm just going to disclose that I struggled with, depression and questions that I needed answers to, things that led me to do things that were not beneficial to me, and that was my mental health struggle when I was younger. And thinking of this, and thinking of how every school is a place of learning and safety, I was I'm very disappointed reading the article about how this money, this funding is taking away from the school's ability to reach and serve children like I was, in a complete and total and well-trained and qualified manner. So that loss of those services, taking away those services from kids and giving it into, diverting it into another program that isn't serving them as well, is troubling to me. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Zach. Our next public comment will come from Reese Kelly. Reese, do you acknowledge and agree to the public comment guidelines?
I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Reese.
Man, Zach makes me want to cry over here. That was really, that resonated with me. I think that we have a major mental health crisis with youth in our nation and in Vermont, and reading articles about the wait times for students or for young people having to wait, 48, 72 hours in the emergency room to get critical mental health care when there are opportunities to do that in a preventative way in schools, to me really stands out again as a motivating factor for not having money go to police officers, but go to things that are actually probably some of the largest needs within our schools. There are two things that I really want to point out. Is one, I was really, really disappointed with Superintendent Durth's comments in Vermont Digger that he has, no flexibility, or, I don't have an open mind about this situation. I believe strongly in SROs, and that he is pro-police. I'm actually shocked that an administrator in a school district that has a committee that is undergoing this amount of research has drawn a line in the sand as to where he stands. So what that reminds me of is this committee is actually not neutral in his eyes. And I think that's important just for the committee to be aware of, is that the superintendent seems motivated or interested to not actually hear anything that's coming from this, because he's made public statements saying how he already feels about it. The other thing is, I've been working for the last few months for a national organization called the JED Foundation, and their focus is on helping K through 12 students and college students on reducing suicide in these institutions, helping with mental health. And I've been working with them on a literature review on the risk factors for LGBTQ students in high schools and in colleges. And one of them actually is SROs. That is a risk factor for the mental health of LGBTQ students, supported by multiple peer-reviewed research studies across the nation. And that GLSEN, which is one of the national organizations, it used to be called the Gay, Straight, or Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, I can't forget. Anyway, they have a really great resource that one of the suggestions they also have is to get SROs out of school. So again, I just want to put a nod that there is national research on the negative impact of SROs on students, on their mental health, and contributing to the school to prison pipeline for BIPOC students, for LGBTQ students, and for students with disabilities. And we really have to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Reese. That is the final request for public comment that I have at this time. So we will move on to our presentation from the future subgroup.
And John, before we do that, I just wanted to note that there is an updated slide, sorry, but he did give me permission to interrupt him to offer a couple of administrative things. I'm not a mean person, I promise. All right. And I just want to make a note that there was an updated slide from last meeting's presentation that Sarah Biggie has offered up, and it's on our website now. So if folks want to go there. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to speak to that specifically or just alert folks that there's an updated slide there. I see your finger, so yes, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to alert that there was a slide, I believe it's slide number 9. It was in relation to the Equity Committee. And just to bring some accuracy to that, there was a quote there that wasn't representative of the whole committee, but one member. And so we just made that correction on that slide. I do think that there's going to be potentially some discussion about the Equity Committee. It seemed like that was on the agenda, so maybe we can talk further about that during that section.
Yes, and actually, thanks for flagging that, because we were going to speak about the meeting that the co-chairs had planned with the equity committee tonight, but our co-chair, who was able to be at that meeting, had a last-minute family issue this evening, so she requested that we postpone that until our next meeting, since it's just 2 weeks from now. And if there are questions, I know some members are on from the equity committee. If there's questions or things you'd like to raise as we go through, because I know tonight we're talking about the student survey and the staff survey, we will always open up for Q&A, or sorry, questions through the chat when we get to the Q&A portion of the agenda. So while we had to make that pivot tonight, please feel free to still engage with questions that you all raised in that meeting with Shannon, and we'll bring that forward next week, or sorry, next meeting, because we had a little bit of a pivot we had to make. Great. All right, John, back to you.
Okay. And I will now turn it over to our future subgroup, or our subgroup studying the future of the SRO program.
I can start. Okay. So we are the future group, and our task was to help the community explore the impact on the students and staff if the SRO program stays as is modified and or removed and replaced with something else. So the 4 questions we had were: how should the SRO program be altered to better meet the needs of students and staff? If SROs were removed, what new services would need to be improved, created, or implemented? Who would be impacted by the removal of this program, and who would benefit from this program? The data and resources we used were the MRUSD staff survey, the student survey, public comments from board meetings and SRO committee meetings, review of information provided by previous SRO groups, history and future, personal statements, public documents, resources from the community, other VT school districts, SRO review process study cases. It is important to note that we acknowledge there are both advantages and disadvantages in the survey tools that we use as a part of our work. A major advantage includes providing students and staff with an opportunity to provide input and share their thoughts regarding the role of SROs in our district. With that said, we recognize that not all voices are represented in the survey results, with many of those voices likely representing most of our most vulnerable and marginalized populations.
Thanks, Leah. Nice job. So I'm just going to go over the results of the staff survey with the group. So we administered a survey to all MRUSD staff, and just to clarify that a little bit further, what that means, it's any paid employee of the Maple Run School District. So that obviously includes teachers, administrators, support staff, but it also includes coaches, contracted service providers, and all other paid employees. So our maintenance folks, our technology people, all MRUSD staff. When you look at the breakdown between who took the survey, you can see that about 33% of respondents represented BFA, so our high school. About 5% represented our career and technical center. 29% represented St. Albans City School. About 23% represented our town school. Almost 5% represented Fairfield. 6% represented central office, or those folks that work in multiple buildings, and 0 participation from Collins-Pearly. If you then tease out that data even further into the role of that staff, about 59% were teachers, 25% were our support staff, 7% were homeschool coordinators, school counselors, or our behavioral staff. 2% were administrators, and less than 1% were contracted service providers, and 6% fell into the other category. The survey was open for 1 week from April 13th to April 20th, and it was sent via email to Maple Run email addresses. We had a total of 219 respondents, and there's approximately 600 staff in the school district. So that means that about 37% of our staff are represented in the survey results. Emma indicated that most surveys receive a response rate of between 25 and 33%. So our response rate of 37 would be about average. When you break down the respondents even further, 23.3% of the total respondents identified as either a part of the BIPOC, LGBTQ plus communities or wish to not disclose. One of the questions in the survey was, I feel physically, mentally, emotionally safer with an SRO present in the school building. This was done on a Likert scale between 1 and 5, with 1 representing the respondent completely disagrees with that statement, 5 representing they completely agree, and 3 being neutral. If you see the graph, you can see that the total percentage of people who answered 1 or 2 is about 14.2%. And then if you add the total of respondents who answered either 4 or 5, that's about 69.7% of respondents. Again, we broke down that data even further, and out of all of the respondents that answered either a 1 or a 2, 3.4% of those respondents represented, again, the BIPOC, LGBTQ plus communities, or they wish to not disclose. And on the other side of that, out of all respondents who answered either 4 or 5, 22% of those, or sorry, 3 and up, 22% of those respondents were from the BIPOC, LGBTQ plus communities or wish to not disclose. I do think it's important to point out that disabilities is not referenced in a subcategory because none of that information was provided. So I just wanted to point that out. On the right-hand side of the screen, what we did was we took some anecdotal comments that were made that represented very common themes out of a lot of the responses. So one of those comments being, our resource officers help us with security, safety, and welfare of our school. Our resource officers are positive role models for our students and key connection between community and school. I respect and appreciate them for all of their dedication to our community. And then another comment that represented a recurring theme was, I don't think having a police officer is making our school safer. I think there are other things that could make our school safer, but having a police presence is not one of them. Another question that was asked as part of the survey was, students feel physically, mentally, emotionally safer with an SRO present in the school building. And just a reminder that this survey was taken by staff. So it's staff's perception that students feel safer. Again, it's on the same Likert scale of 1 to 5. You'll notice that those who answered 1 or 2, that's a combined percentage of 16.2%. And those that answered 4 or 5 on that question is a combined total of 59.7%. Again, if you pare down the data or dive deeper into the data, out of those who answered 1 or 2, 3.4% represented the BIPOC, LGBTQ plus community or wish to not disclose. And those that answered 3 or higher, 23.8% were from the BIPOC, LGBTQ plus communities or wish to not disclose. Similarly, a couple of anecdotal comments that were made that represented some common themes. The first one being, I think the children feel safe within the school community with our SRO present, as they are building relationships with our students so that even outside of school, they may feel safer with the police if something were to happen outside of school. And another comment that represented a common theme, the presence of a police officer is triggering for a lot of the population at our school. School is a safe place for our students. Many of them have had experiences with police in their personal lives that make a police present in school seem like it is not a safe place. A few other questions that were asked: are you familiar with the SRO program and your school and its purpose? 74% of respondents said yes, 2% said no, and 24% of the staff that responded said sort of. To the question, do you think SROs should be in school? 70% of staff said yes, that took the survey. 12% said no, 14% were unsure, and 4% did not have a preference. Another question that was asked is, what would you want to change about the SRO program and your school? And again, what we did is we filtered through all of the anecdotal comments and tried to pick out ones that were very common and represented repeated themes throughout. So some of those include divert the budget for the SRO program to school-based clinicians and or social workers, as there is usually a wait list to get students appointments with therapists. More consistent communication between the SROs and teachers so that we are all on the same page to support our students. Sometimes communication gets lost and it's harder to collaborate effectively. Improve training for SROs around their combined roles of school safety and student support. And understand what the program is supposed to be about and how that role is being implemented. And then the last slide on the staff survey is we asked, what type of interactions do you typically have with SROs? And the table on the right shows the different categories and the rate of response. So almost 82% of respondents said their typical interaction is for socialization or social interactions. About 40% said for safety. That could either be student safety, lockdown drills, fire drills. About 31% said educational training and information. About 28% said for therapeutic supports. 20% said for disciplinary reasons, and 17% said for other reasons.
Okay, I did the student survey results. So in total, we have 1,251 students from the survey, which we did grades 7 through 12. We only got 303 responses, which is about a quarter of the student body, but that is normal for surveys. 21.4 of those respondents identified as BIPOC or LGBTQ+, or they did not wish to disclose. So for the question, are you familiar with the SRO program and its purpose? 43% said yes, 22% said no, and 34% said sort of. I thought this was important to include because in the job explanation, it was said they needed to be visible within the school community, attend and participate in school functions, build working relationships with the school staff as well as student and parent groups. So I thought it was interesting to see how the students' majority didn't really quite know about the SRO program. In the question, how often do you interact with SROs? 30% said they never had an interaction with SROs. 41% said rarely ever. 14% said once a week, and 7% said every day. The rest are brief explanations, mostly saying no. And with our quotes that are more common is, I haven't had any experience with the SROs. or that they're always greeting people in the hallways and occasionally coming into our classes. This was our scale that's very close to the staff. It's the same question the staff was asked. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 3 being neutral, how much do you agree with this statement? I feel physically, mentally, and emotionally safe with an SRO present in the school building. We have 5% saying they do not at a 1, 7% at a 2, 33% at 3, 21% at 4, and 32% at 9. And then the most common comments were, it gives me a sense of safety with an armed, trained, and friendly officer patrolling the school for danger, along with the cute dog. Most of the issues that scare me in school are situations that cops do not have training in. I'd rather have someone who can de-escalate without a gun. And my screen cut off. And taser. And then we have the question, do you think SROs should be in school? 30% said no preference, 56% said yes, and I don't know what percent of no said. But those that did answer no, 45.45% are a part of minority and demographics, so that would be BIPOC, LGBTQ, or an other. And then our common comments under that is, I am not sure it is worth the money. However, I feel it supports the community-wide positive relationship between the community and the local police. And the other is, I've only had positive experiences with SROs and police throughout my life, so I feel comfortable with them around, which isn't the case for everyone at Maple Run Unified School Districts. So these are a lot of comments, but I thought they were important to include for consensus. These are the more on the negative side of SROs. I think all SROs should be removed from schools because of kids who are triggered by the sight of an officer, because school is supposed to be a safe place, and my experience with SROs have made that the opposite. Having an SRO in the school does not impact my feelings of safety. I want someone who can help kids who are panicking or reacting badly, who aren't wearing police uniforms and wearing guns. That creates distrust for many of us, and it usually just weaponizing into scaring kids enough to pull it together. I'm not super familiar with the SRO program purpose, but from the list above, it sounds like the program is really focused around student safety and mental health, and I think that can be done without an armed law enforcement officer. I would feel much safer with more mental health officers on campus who are more widely available in places to rest and speak with them, have local officers on standby in case we have a complete emergency. This is a school full of children, and officers should not be necessary. And then on the other side, we have, I enjoy interactions that I've had with the SROs, and it makes school seem safer, like a safer place, knowing that if something bad ever happens, there's a police officer already on the grounds to respond to it. Our current SRO has participated in unified sports practice after school on several different occasions. She is kind and enjoyable. I would like to know more about it and maybe have the program explained when you first start at school with an SRO program. I really enjoy them and what they do, making me feel safer at school. And many students need more opportunities to connect with the SROs and feel more comfortable around them in general.
You want me to take this slide, Leah?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. So what we did is we looked at, we did a kind of comparison between the staff survey and the student survey, and there were a lot of common themes that we noticed, or differences that we noticed between the two of them. And some of those key observations were students reporting not understanding the role and purpose of SROs much more significantly than that of staff, which Leah also pointed out earlier. Out of those who answered no to the question, should SROs be in school? Again, 45.5% of students and 38.46% of staff identified as part of the BIPOC LGBTQ+ communities or wish to not disclose. Social interactions and safety were the two most common types of interactions reported by both staff and students, and discipline was the least common type of interaction reported across both groups, staff and students. So we just thought those were worth noting.
All right, so we also had additional document submissions and research. So among the personal statements, let me just adjust my screen here. So we had 5 positive statements submitted and 9 negative towards the SRO program. One of the positive submissions was from a minority. One was from someone with disabilities. The submissions comments hovered around the topics of safety and safety training support, the support dog, getting to know police as our friends, that they're a positive influence, and that they provide bonding opportunities. The personal statements submitted that were negative discussed experiences with false accusations, possible effects of vendettas, concerns over racism, connected to a study on Vermont traffic stops, trauma experiences, safety concerns, connecting to studies questioning whether SROs make schools safer, student achievement concerns connected to studies claiming SRO making students feel unsafe and has negative impact on student achievement, especially for students of color. Some of the public documents that came to us included the main roles of the SRO being safety in terms of planning, patrols, crime deterrence, role modeling, and also dispute mediation, specifically de-escalation techniques. Also, we were able to receive documents detailing the requirements for a SRO, for someone to become an SRO, and that included 3 to 5 years in law enforcement, professional personal traits that exhibited even-temperedness, de-escalation skills, patient attitude, ability to interact well with children. Also, there was a mention of 40 hours of basic SRO course. Just to pull out a quote from the requirements, SROs are charged with having a kid-friendly attitude that puts children at ease. Continuing on with the public documents, we also received the SRO BFA school year 2020 contract that showed the goals, objective duties, functions, the monetary cost, programmatic reporting requirements, qualification requirements, chain of command, training requirements, student transport limitations, and annual evaluation requirements. Other resources that we received from the community included submissions, research, news articles. We had a submission, an article to the Vermont Bar Journal by Deputy State Attorney in Franklin County, stating that the SRO presence is reducing the need for student court intervention and oversight. We had research papers concluding that the SROs have the potential to negatively affect students through increasing student discipline involvement and reducing student educational attainment. That was from the Journal of Policy Analysis and Management. We had data submissions from SRO Paul Talley supporting evidence that SRO presence is in fact reducing juvenile delinquency referrals. and also listing the training and courses taken by our SROs at the district. We also had a list of Maple Run SRO involved incidents. We also had a study comparing school shooting outcomes at schools with and without SRO presence. We had the descriptions of SRO courses from the National Association of School Resource Officers. We had letters opposing police in schools from the ACLU and the Vermont Legal Aid. We had an article study from Criminology and Public Policy finding that increased SROs increased the number of drug and weapon related offenses and exclusionary disciplinary actions for treatment in schools relative to comparison. We had news articles propounding alternatives to SRO and showing concern about effects of SROs on students as shown in studies. We had news articles discussing a past negative BFA SRO incident, and we had a document listing the benefits of the SRO program to Maple Run. To summarize, those benefits listed related to role modeling, proactive conversations, opportunities, bonds leading to solving problems informally, lessening fear of interaction with law enforcement. The two districts that we did touch base with who also went through SRO review study, Montpelier and Champlain Valley, they both ended up eliminating their SRO position. At Montpelier, some of the quotes that I pulled out, the police really need to work on community relationships and working on, of course, on all of our biases and racial issues. And students reported not feeling safe at school with the SRO present. I heard a lot of fear and discomfort that used language on the national scene and applying it to us. Here we have a Vermont Digger article that was able to present the picture of how many schools in Vermont have SROs and how many don't. This is an article from June 26, 2020. And it shows that out of the 52 supervisory unions or large school districts in Vermont, 25 of them have at least one SRO in a school as of June 2020. 24 of them do not have any SROs in schools as of June 2020. The schools that since then do not have SROs has increased to 26, and since then also this number of schools with SROs has decreased to 23. 3 districts did not respond.
So to bring this back full circle, what we then did is we went back to the questions that we were posed with as part of our group work. We took all of that research and all of that information and attempted our best effort at answering the questions that were presented to us. So the first question of how should the SRO program be altered to better meet the needs of students and staff? Again, based on the information that we learned, we came up with more education and information provided to staff, students, parents, guardians, and community to increase the understanding of the program and the role of SROs. Updated MOU to include specific training requirements. Some examples could include implicit bias training, trauma, mental health, restorative practices. With us as Maple Run School District having a say in how often and who provides those trainings. Increased enhancement involvement of Maple Run throughout the entire hiring process of SROs. Clearly outlined communication protocols at the district level when needing to relay important information to staff. Consistent scheduled updates provided to the board of directors. More robust data collection procedures and processes, and revisit, examine whether SROs have to carry lethal weapons. Our second question was, if SROs are removed, what positions or services would need to be improved, created, implemented? Again, based on the research that we did, we came up with mental health counselors, social workers, homeschool coordinators, family engagement specialists, and a police liaison for safety planning, training, and other safety concerns. The third question, who would positively be impacted by the removal of the program? Staff and students who feel less safe in the building and at work or school with an SRO present and in the building. Parents, guardians who feel less safe sending their children to school knowing that an SRO is present. And staff and students who are or feel that they are targeted and or mistreated by SROs. And the final question, who benefits from this program? Staff and students who feel safer in the building and at work or school with an SRO present, SROs. Parents, guardians who feel safer sending their children to school knowing that an SRO is present and available, and administrators, counselors, and other staff that require in-the-moment support and guidance from SROs. And I know we went over, but we're done. Sorry, Emma.
That is okay. We are trying to take the time we need. Martin, thanks for screen sharing. If we can stop screen sharing just for a moment. And John, I'm just going to jump in here and just say a big thank you to the three folks who did this subcommittee work, which was Leah, who was one of our student representatives. Great job, Leah. Always, you know, great to see young folks stepping up into a space that's mostly adults here. So really appreciate your work and great work and leadership. And obviously Alexis and Martin as well. Really appreciate all your time and thoroughness in this presentation. So John, I'm going to hand it back to you and you can just explain how folks can engage with Q&A, and then you can start calling on folks as well. And I'll keep an eye on the time, but I think we have about, let's try to give some time to get through the questions. Anything we don't have time for, I'll sort of flag, but let's try to give us a good 10 to 15 minutes on this.
Absolutely. I've already received quite a few comments during the presentation, so perhaps I'll begin by reading those. Does that sound right to everyone?
Yep.
Okay, let me just get back. Okay, most of the questions came in during the reporting of the survey results. So though they may not refer directly to that, unless I note otherwise, look through it through that lens. So the first question is, why are people who did not disclose their identity lumped in with the BIPOC and LGBTQ plus people? That makes no sense.
I can try to take that one. So what we learned from the last presentation was what we heard was we shouldn't be looking at a very, very small population of respondents in an attempt to not ostracize those individuals or single them out. So if we took the do not disclose respondents out, we wouldn't have been able to report on the other data because it was a very much smaller data representation. If folks would like that pulled out, that is very easy to do and can be done.
Great. So I'm just going to make one little note. I'm going to kind of adjust the way that I'm reading these questions. I may group some together, and I would invite community members who have either follow-up questions or clarifications, put your name in the chat, and once we get through these, we can do that. Does that make sense, Emma?
Yep, and I'm just going to try to keep us mindful on time because we have to talk about our
Definitely.
process for next meeting, which is our last meeting, and hopefully folks can appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay, so then I have, in what other ways has this group discussed specifically engaging with those in the community that stand to be the most harmed by the program? Is there a sense that folks who have been marginalized are openly sharing feedback and feel safe and welcome to do so?
I think we had that's why we have like public comment, and they can send emails to the actual committee. I don't think that's just for us three. And we kind of made that decision that it's harder to do that, and we don't want to upset anyone by pointing them out either. So that's why we just sent the email, of course, of the survey.
Okay, and then I also have, can the data be disaggregated between BIPOC and LGBTQ plus community? White folks in the LGBTQ plus community and BIPOC lived experiences are not the same. So actually, sorry, I'm gonna, before we dive into that, it kind of feels like there's a lot of questions around that, getting the data more granular. And I wanna just make sure that we're not missing something at the expense of asking that again. What are the results when you take non-identifying people out of this group? This is completely skewing the data and not an accurate analysis. I'll add that studies show that white people are more likely not to disclose their race than BIPOC folks. Then it is notable that the percentage of BIPOC and LGBT folks stating that they do not want the program seems far higher than the percentage of these folks in the general population. Speaks volumes to me. Okay, and then, sorry, I'm going to do one more group and then we can kind of, then it said, if there was such a small number of respondents who were LGBTQ and BIPOC, why didn't you seek out more respondents from these communities?
I'll just jump in to say we did this last time. We can do the deaggregation of the data. So I'll just take that piece. So we'll go back through those notes and go where we can. I will flag, like we did with the community survey, if it gets down to a singular person or two, we'll make a note about just really protecting people's privacy, small town Vermont stuff, but there should be a way to break into BIPOC and LGBTQ plus folks as well. So I'll just speak to that.
Okay. And then we have the low response of the BIPOC community could be represented by the low percentage of students who identify as BIPOC. And then we also have, I think those statistically small numbers need to be considered with great weight because those are the respondents with the most direct stake in the questions.
And John, before we go on, there was one other question you had just read in that batch that I do just want to open up to the subgroup and others, because this would apply to the community survey as well, and just the general outreach is the committee's approach to alternative ways to reach out to folks. And I could rattle off our different methods, but I want to just give the space for committee members to answer that question around other outreach methods beyond a survey to folks, especially impacted community folks, which we've heard are BIPOC folks, LGBTQ folks, folks who with different abilities, etc. So does anyone on the committee want to speak to that first?
I can give it a try, but I don't want to speak for the other committee members. I think one thing that we considered was a lot of students or staff may not come to us three as individuals because we might not be the person that they feel comfortable approaching or talking to about it. So a lot of our staff know that this work is being done and that the surveys have went out, and they know that if they are approached by students or colleagues to disclose with their permission, that information could be shared with us. But if that staff or student was not giving permission for that to be shared, it would not be. So I think that was a little bit more of the outreach that we did. I do want to address one comment of why didn't we specifically seek out certain populations of people. And one thing that I've actually learned as being part of our equity committee, I'm no longer on that committee, but when I was that is actually what you don't want to do. So that felt very uncomfortable for me to think about approaching a student or a staff and asking them a specific question if that wasn't welcomed or wanted on their end.
Thanks, Alexis. And I will also just say, while the committee is wrapping up its work in the next 2 to 4 weeks before it's the second meeting in June, and I'll talk about this again at the end of the meeting, there's still time for folks to engage. This is not a perfect process by any means, and part of the recommendations of the committee, which I'll be hoping to help you guide you through, are noting the gaps. That this is an all volunteer committee, and this is by no means we're expecting to do this in the most perfect way possible. So we'll get there with those conversations, and if people have further input or ideas or suggestions, we're always open to that. So John, why don't we go into any other comments and questions?
Yep, we had a question: who should we contact for a public records request of the full data set from the survey? But I believe, Emma, you kind of addressed that when you said we could disaggregate that data and put it up on the website. We also have, I wonder what would happen in an affinity space, if an affinity space, I believe, was created for BIPOC folks to speak openly. And then we had someone who wanted to respond. Let's see here. Are people aware that targeted surveying to underrepresented groups is a positive and appropriate data collection method, and it is not the same as asking people inappropriate questions they don't want to answer? Similar to that theme, there is a difference between asking BIPOC people to teach white people about their experience and mindfully engaging BIPOC voice. So that seemed to be a response to that.
Before we move on, does the committee have any responses to those comments presented by folks in the chat? Observations, wonderings?
I just wanted to add, unlike the community survey where we had to try various angles in the hope of reaching everyone for them to have a voice, when it comes to the staff and the student surveys, in a way, they were captive audiences because we had access to all their emails. And so every single person was able to be reached with the survey because we had access to them. And so everyone was equally on the same footing in terms of the opportunity to respond to the survey.
Other reactions, questions, responses? George, yep.
Excuse me, this survey for grades 7 through 12, and just hit me with the right information if I don't get it right, but so that's largely BFA, the tech center, etc. The 7-8 component, so 2 out of the 6 grades that were surveyed here with this are then from the elementary schools. And I guess I'm curious with the disaggregation potential. Was there anything that inquired as to like a grade so that we could say, oh, this subset of information is from the various elementary schools or the pre-K 8s versus the BFA campus, including the tech center? Just wondering if again, there might be some type of distinction in role or I don't know, differences in, serving a client base that's considerably younger versus at the high school, adolescent, teenager level. So just only thing hit me there. Thanks.
Yeah, sadly, we did not include that. So we do not have that data for those grades or especially or schools, which schools they came from as well.
Also, I wanted to add that if we did go that granular, we do risk exposing some extreme minorities. So there's a big difference between you being a BIPOC, responding to a survey where you might be assumed to be in any grade, versus you having to say you're in grade 7 and you're a BIPOC. And then with our community, it would essentially identify that student and not allow them to truly express their opinion. Something else I did want to note again is that in terms of percentage of responses to the survey, the percentages did reflect general trends when you use a survey in terms of responses. So we did not have an underrepresentation of feedback or overrepresentation.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks, George. Okay, I think John has a couple more comments, so we're going to bring those into the space, and then we're going to transition into John's piece that we added to the agenda tonight.
Okay, two final comments. One is, in my experience, marginalized students often share with me that they don't speak up because nothing will be done or no one cares. And additionally, I just want to reiterate that the perception of an equal opportunity does not mean something is equitable. For example, if a single parent receives an email and has to work, teach kids at home during a pandemic, etc., they actually have less of an opportunity to respond to the email than someone who has a second caregiver, maybe no kids, etc.
Thanks, John. I really want to appreciate all the comments that were put into the chat. I know this is kind of an awkward way to engage in conversation around this very complicated topic, and it may not be complicated for some folks. It's complicated for some, not for others. I mean, and all of the information and the insights that people provided tonight will fold into kind of how we're going to deliberate next meeting. So it's not for naught. It's not going to sort of a dead end. We're really going to do our best to incorporate that. And as I mentioned, note where further work is needed, where the gaps are, and really the charge of this committee is to set a course for the school board. So I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of the committee here. We take this very seriously, and we really, really do value everyone's input and ideas they're providing. And if more needs to be said, please do feel free to email us or email me separately or the co-chairs, and we'll keep pulling that forward. Any final thoughts from the committee before we hear from John on his conversation with the SROs?
I just wanted to add a final comment to Leah and Martin and just thank them for their hard work. I think, this is really tough work and really hard work, and we are all human. And we really, truly try to do the best that we can. So I just want to express my appreciation and my respect for the both of them in doing this work. So thank you both.
Excellent. Thanks, Alexis.
Sure.
Okay, John, so we're going to switch. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, lastly, before we move on, I did want to remind community members in terms of engaging with this committee, there is always the opportunity, in addition to public comment at the meetings or sending an email to the committee email. If you wish to submit an anonymous comment, myself and the co-chair Shannon are available to conduct interviews and take statements that we will report on in an anonymous way, if that is the best way to do that. So I just want to make sure that people remain aware of that.
And John, as you get going in your next section here, if folks have questions for John's piece, I'll ask people to chat me, Emma, and I will keep track of that so it doesn't distract you, John, as you take us through your next piece.
Okay. And I'm now going to experience the screen share anxiety. Let's see here. Okay. Shannon and I met with the Maple Run SROs last week, and this is a report on the broad themes that were discussed at that meeting. And I don't know how to change the slide. There it is. Myself and Shannon were in attendance, in addition to Lieutenant Paul Talley, the SRO at SATEC, Corporal Christine Koch, the SRO at BFA, and Officer Kaylee Carteret, the SRO at St. Albans City School. One of the things we asked about were typical day-to-day duties. We wanted to be sure that we were covering all bases. We know that even though we're looking at an MOU and getting input from staff and students, often there is a delta between those written responsibilities and what actually happens during a normal day. So that that was a big part of our conversation. We were made aware of the fact that the administrators at each individual school actually determine the duties of the SRO. So a principal at one school might request an SRO do one thing that is not asked of the SRO at another school. But generally speaking, the SROs are present at student drop-off and pickup, often to direct traffic as parents drop off in cars to deal with buses and things like that. They are responsible for the safety of the school grounds and perimeter. They conduct wellness and truancy checks accompanied by school staff. Before COVID, all of the SROs were present in the cafeteria during lunch, occasionally sat in on guidance classes. Some conducted public safety classes at the tech center and were present in the civics class at BFA. And all of the SROs put an emphasis on their work in relationship building. Some of the other duties that they talked about were event security, sporting events, school dances, graduation, the prom, things like that, often at the request of the school administrator. The SROs are actively reaching out to school groups such as the GSA in BFA, and I'm forgetting what that acronym stands for. The Therapy Dog Murphy, very popular at BFA. The SROs are acting as a liaison between the school community, the school and community resources such as Restorative Justice Center, NCSS, DCF, and others. They also reported that relationships built at school can contribute to de-escalation during regular patrol or non-school related calls. Talked a little bit about, whoops, sorry about that. Talked a little bit about perhaps a positive relationship that was built at school if they were to encounter that person during another, during a regular police duty, perhaps that relationship actually, though they didn't speak, specifically in terms of names and things like that, they did say that it had happened, that relationship had had a positive impact on a non-school police interaction. The other topic that we talked about were misconceptions about the SRO program, things that they know and experience that the public may not. The SROs do not participate in regular school discipline. They uphold the rights of students even in the face of school policy. They talked a little bit about an occasion where a student was using their phone in school, which is not allowed, and refused to give up their phone. And the SRO was asked by an administrator to take the student's phone, and the SRO had to say that as I actually can't do that. The person is they have a right to have that, and for me to step in that instance would be inappropriate. There was also another instance of an 18-year-old student who had tobacco on school property, also not allowed under school rules. However, since the student was 18, the SRO couldn't take it away, but they were able to negotiate a agreeable outcome for that. They mentioned that not all interactions with SROs result in a case. And the difference between a citation and an arrest, saying that they do not arrest students in schools. They may present a student with a citation, which would refer them, which would be equivalent to like a judicial referral. And then they determine from there if there's actual criminal activity. And the SROs expressed a desire to improve their roles and said that they actually did not want to force interactions with students who did not feel comfortable around them. I highlighted a couple individual comments, and I'm going to move my screen around so I can read them. The officer went with a member of school staff to do a wellness check. The student had not been in school for months. The next day, the student went to school and the officer greeted that student, building the relationship and showing the students they care about their well-being. The SRO was asked to help with a student who had not been at school. The SRO visited a student every day for a week. The student finally came back to school and has now been in school every day. The SRO still has lunch every week with the student. We understand there are students who may not feel comfortable around SROs, but we cannot fix what we do not know. And finally, we asked them about any improvements to the program that they thought would be beneficial. And they suggested that any school official involved with discipline should take the 40-hour course that the SROs take, or at least part of it, or be specifically aware of what they are asked to do in that. And to clarify what situations SROs should be aware of, standardize across the district, specifically talking about safety concerns, and to have a better awareness of the SRO duties and limitations, kind of referring back to that upholding rights piece, I believe. So that is all I have from that.
Great, thanks, John. Thanks for that. And these slides, by the way, from both presentations will be up on the website, hopefully within 24 hours or so when we post them there. So you can look for them there. And again, reminder, if folks have questions from the community, you can chat me, Emma. You can find me under the co-host list there. We have one question so far. Was there a single data point the SROs presented? Is there a single data point that the SROs presented?
They're not. No, we did not. We don't believe we got into specific numbers. No.
Okay. Okay. Another question came in from for other school districts across the nation with an SRO program. What are their requirements for SRO training, education, and experience?
That is a good question. I believe the training program, National Association of SRO Training, so I believe that may be a standardized program, but we could look into that further for sure.
Great, I'll make a note of that so that we can add that for a follow-up question, just to double check ourselves there. Any other questions from the community, or for this matter, committee members? We have one more that came in. The claim that the SROs don't conduct discipline seems to refute the 20% of staff who said that they do. Given that each school is different, is it possible that some SROs do conduct discipline?
I don't know. I will say that in the conversation we had, it was emphatically stated that they did not.
Okay. And we can, of course, double check these questions. This is a little bit on the grill here, John. So thanks for hanging in there. And to whom is the SRO accountable to if the SRO's behavior is inappropriate? So who is the report? Who does the SRO report to, and who holds accountability?
That is a good question. I believe, and I may not be 100% clear on this, but I believe the SRO would interface first with the administrator at their school, and then Lieutenant Talley is the police officer in charge of the SRO program overall from the perspective of the police department. And I believe that's correct. Lieutenant Talley, if that's not correct, feel free to shoot me a message.
Great, and I'll ask again if there's more questions while maybe Lieutenant Talley clarifies that. And anything else, again, that we aren't fully answering, we'll do the same thing we did last time and get further answers and post those and respond. Another one has come in. What teaching responsibilities do the SROs have in the schools?
They talked about, it seemed like at the elementary level, they were talking about maybe sort of sitting in a little bit with classes led by a guidance counselor. However, at the high school, in the tech center, they do a public safety unit. And when a public safety class, and when the public safety class enters the law enforcement portion, the SRO is in charge of that. And then also there was some involvement in the civics class, I believe.
Okay, thanks, John. A couple more. Does the SRO have to document every interaction with a student?
Every interaction, I do not believe so. And I think they would, yeah, I think they would, you know, interaction ranging from, you know, a hello in the hallway versus a, you know, a more, yeah, they do not have to document every interaction.
Okay, great. I'm gonna take this as the last one. And if there's, because we have to do one more agenda item tonight, folks. So if there's more that come in, I'm gonna just flag those and we'll answer them after the meeting. So I really appreciate all these questions. So the last one that we'll leave on for now, but folks can keep adding them and we'll download them and get back to folks. Last one for tonight, what skills and training, oops, sorry, no, that was not the right one. Which of the functions listed require an officer? And do we need so many full-time officers on campus to meet that need?
That is a good question. I think that is one of the questions the committee at large is going to seek to explore, for sure.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and read the other two that came in just so the committee knows, and we'll work on the answers and get them back out to folks, including the committee. So the last two questions put into the chat were, what skills and trainings do the SROs need in order to support the wellness of students? And then the last one that came in is, what anti-racist and anti-bias trainings do SROs have? Given the recent revelations of white supremacy and law enforcement, is their social media, et cetera, reviewed to make sure that they are not involved in groups like that? So we will take all those questions down and the ones that we had partial answers for and get back to folks. I really appreciate everyone sending these questions in. And committee, I'll just turn to you once more before I go into sort of the last item, which is about our final meeting and transitioning into recommendations. Are there any final questions or thoughts people have on John's presentation with the SROs you'd like to raise? I'm going to beg about 5 to 8 minutes past 6:30, so I'm just giving you full warning. Anything else from the committee before we move on? Okay, y'all are still breathing, right? Okay, this is like our whatever from a lot of folks on Zoom, so I really appreciate people staying here. Okay. All right. So one quick note, and I just got this reminder in the chat as well. One quick note, just a reminder, we were planning to have a report on the equity committee meeting, the district's equity committee meeting with the co-chairs that happened a few days ago. Shannon was the lead on that meeting because John was unable to attend. And since Shannon couldn't be here tonight, we've tabled that for next week, though we'll do a similar walkthrough of that information and provide questions, have questions and answers on that. So that will be on next meeting's agenda. So thanks everyone for their patience on that pivot we had to make. So with that, I just want to remind the committee and folks watching at home that this committee's charge is coming to an end. So our next and final meeting at this point is May 27th, same time, 5 to 6:30. And as you just heard, we'll have a little bit of time on the equity committee meeting report. But at that meeting, that will be the time for us to really start to move into deliberations and starting to explore what recommendations you all are comfortable with making to the school board. A reminder that this committee is not charged with making the final decision. It was asked to work towards consensus if possible to make a report that all of you can sign off on to send to the school board. Now, consensus is a really, if in its purest sense, is a really long and arduous process, or it can be at least. So one thing that I'd like us to start thinking about is if we cannot get to that point when we've gone through, 90 minutes or so, or an hour of deliberations, and you've all done your pre-thinking and whatnot ahead of that meeting, what flexibility we might have to allow folks to write, a dissenting opinion. There's a few different process things we can offer, but to really just make sure that the most important thing is that everyone's voice feels heard in this process, and that we can try to work towards a place as close to consensus as possible. At least that would be my recommendation, because there's only so much time on this group's timeline. Sorry, lost whatever word I was going for. So to prepare for the last meeting, a couple things that I want to suggest for folks to think about. The first is for each of the subgroups, we are asked to write a written set of recommendations to the board. They will need it about a week before the June 16th meeting. June 16th will be the day that the co-chairs and I will go to the board. Any committee member is welcome to join us. We would like safety in numbers in presenting the body of work for which you've all done. So June 16th, I believe the meeting starts at 6 o'clock. I'm not sure the agenda item time, but just so that's on people's radar screens. And because the board needs it in writing in their packet, we will have to have our report to them the Friday before. So it's like roughly, I don't know, 5 days or so before. So that's the timeline we're working on. I'll ask each of the subgroups if you could make sure you have sort of an organized fashion for me, a list of the folks you've interviewed. It could just be job titles and whatnot. If there's folks who don't want to be named by personal name, that's fine. But just a list of the folks you've interviewed, the most useful resources you had. We've collected a boatload of resources. It's all on the website. But if there are pieces that you felt in your work and deliberations that were most compelling, that would be helpful to sort of curate a little bit. We'll make everything available, of course, to the board, but there's a lot there. And the final thing was any other pertinent files that you had. A lot of this is already uploaded, but if you had a highlight, yes, I would encourage the board to really look at this piece of work we did. A lot of you did slides, for example, then that would just be a helpful piece. I imagine that will go into some sort of appendix. I don't know what part of it, but some portion of the written piece will do some nice summary of the body of work you've all put together. I'm thinking for the meeting, and I'm going to meet with the co-chairs between now and our final meeting, that we would have a lot of space for open discussion, and it's sort of hard to work off a blank slate. So we've heard a lot of what I call supposals, you know, the fancy word for proposals around very many different paths you can take forward in what could change, what should change, also ranging from keep the status quo to end the SRO program completely. So there's a lot of different variations. So one thing I was thinking of doing was working with the co-chairs to put a couple of possibilities for it so folks can react and build off of that. So that's just one thinking piece I have. And if you have thoughts on that, feel free to email me offline and we can talk that through. And that way we could do maybe straw polls or modify or amend as the conversation takes us on the 27th. And also see, frankly, where there's a lot of division or, as we said before, gaps in what we are able to put together. Just another thing to be aware of. So in between the 27th and that deadline, we have to get something to the board. There'll most likely be a written document that will draft from what we've talked about on the 27th that I'll need all of you to read and respond to. So please help me not have to track every single person down. So just be knowledgeable that there's going to be a document coming out that we would probably need your final consent. Yes, I sign off on this, or nope, I want to do another path. So that will be roughly sometime between May 27th and June 10th or so. We'll try to give you plenty of time to read it, but I do ask for committee members to be ready to read and respond. So we have your voice in there. I talked about June 16th, talked about the consensus thing. And in these recommendations, the board did also ask us for a justification that came from the board chair. So we'll be writing in that. We won't just write, end the program or continue the program. We will have some narrative around justification, hopefully from the rich conversation we'll have next time. And yes, and gaps. So that piece I said earlier, we want to also note where we were limited, where we know we didn't have enough time or areas needed for more exploration. Again, the board is ultimately the deciding factor, and we want to make sure that we are transparent in where we felt like we were thorough and where we could have used some more work. Any initial reactions to that? That's kind of where we're headed. That generally feel okay, that approach? Is there anything wildly different you all are expecting? Any final thoughts, reactions? I hope you're all still breathing and alive. Okay, the Zoom, y'all are very still. Okay, great, my internet is still working. Okay, thank you, Jamila. Yes, I saw a hand wave. Okay, because remember, my small child likes to pull the Wi-Fi plug out just about this time when he comes home. So I just want to make sure I'm still connected. Okay, that was just a bit of humor. Okay, to leave you on. All right, friends, so we're gonna see each other again on May 27th, 5 to 6:30. That will be deliberation. And if I want to wait with the co-chairs, if there's any pre-work like questions to get you thinking ahead of time, we'll send that out as well. So just please come prepared. And a gentle reminder, if you've been a little behind and reading stuff on the website, this would be a great opportunity to use the next 2 weeks. No pressure, but there's a lot of great stuff that the community has provided for you all. So I encourage you to go through. You can sort by date, all those Google files that are also available to the public. So this is the time to catch up if you have not seen all this great stuff in there. Okay, so I think with that, we are done. Let me just double check the chat here. Okay, all right, so again, folks can reach out to me directly, members of the community and committee. We'll get back to you all with questions we could not answer. And I believe with that, we can stop recording and let people go on their evenings.